a freelance writer and journalist. Who cares? Sorry, I misread that. Who cares is the title of his book. His recent book is entitled Who Cares? It's a book about charity. It caused a riot in the third sector and the mainstream press. It was dubbed both wrong-headed and invaluable. I mean, the book should be. The Guardian concluded that, and I quote, his enthusiasm for the autonomy of charity is clear. Nick has written extensively on a wide range of subjects for a wide range of magazines and newspapers, including the Guardian Society and the Third Sector magazine. He frequently appears on television and radio, and he's currently writing a book about healthcare that's due out at the end of the year. So that's Nick.
It's my belief that voluntary organisations shouldn't expect state authorities, they shouldn't look to state authorities to safeguard their independence. Only they can do that. And this means, therefore, that the amount of money and how the money comes in is very, very important. It's widely acknowledged that current funding regimes adversely affect the services that voluntary organisations offer across the country. Survey after survey and audit after audit arrives at exactly the same conclusion. Too much risk is loaded onto voluntary groups by statutory agencies, and this unequal distribution of risk creates an asymmetry of power. And obviously, one of the main and most widespread gripes, and the one that is very relevant this evening, is that local authorities very often force voluntary bodies to accept short-term contracts and grants. Grants that are very easy to remove, at short notice, without any real cost incurred to the local authority. But there are costs, of course. Costs to the social capital. If you're forgiven for being extremely crude, I think that councils are, in general, pretty rubbish funders. If this is the case, we can't blindly bank on the benevolence of local authorities. But I also don't think that there's some kind of conspiracy by the great Leviathan of the state. Anyone who knows how government works knows that it simply isn't joined up enough to be a big conspiracy body. So I wonder if sometimes voluntary organisations need to grow up a little bit. If they want to dip their fingers into the public purse, if they want to enter into a market for contracts or grants or anything else, rather than look for voluntary donations, private donations, foundation grants, then they should accept that this means taking fairly serious risks. And that also means that they should have cake and eat. If you're taking taxpayers' money to deliver services, then you absolutely have to deliver those services. What matters is that the funding that comes in from local authorities doesn't take over. Because if voluntary organisations become too dependent on such money, they risk great instability. They forsake their overall ability to act without coercion, to do their own way, to go their own thing. They compromise, at least to a certain extent, their independence. So this being the case, we need to be clear about what an organisation is, what it wants to do, how it wants to achieve it. It's important to simply diversify funding streams. If you're over-dependent on a single source of funding, then it makes you vulnerable. And mixed funding, conversely, obviously makes you much more sustainable. I think in the future, if you ignore this, then it's difficult to know who to blame. I think it's very bad news if voluntary sector bodies allow themselves to become subject to the caprices of local councils. And local councils are very often capricious. They have their own political aims and objectives that they want to achieve. And when voluntary bodies engage in that market or that funding, they often become subject to those whims. And at the end of the day, it's always the beneficiaries, the people that are served, who lose out. In practical terms, what's meant by this? Well, there are worries about whether or not charities have the power to speak out freely. And there are worries about whether or not charities change the way that they operate according to what their funders want them to do. But obviously, in the case here, the great worry is that a voluntary body goes bust, or that it may go bust, and that it will therefore no longer be able to deliver services for the people that are most in need. This means that voluntary organisations need to look very seriously to how else they might be able to support themselves and make themselves sustainable in what is an increasingly high-pressured and contentious market for money, for public money. So I'd like to wrap up with a challenge. I think that sometimes voluntary and charitable organisations assume that the status alone is proof enough of independence and effectiveness. And I think that increasingly it becomes necessary to be able to demonstrate that effectiveness and to be able to do so in a way that makes it absolutely beyond all doubt that the funding must come in, and if it doesn't come in from public authorities, it can be gleaned from foundations and private donations. Voluntary organisations need to build more and more links with their communities, and the communities need to take responsibility for the organisations that they believe in and support them financially. Because voluntary organisations need to be able to demonstrate that they have a brilliant beverage called a will and a life of their own. And I think if they can't do that, they should be quite worried. Thank you.